with Peter, and Peter kind of fed him and told him, shared with him some of the experiences that he had. Was Peter married? What was her name? Doesn't tell. How do you know he was married? Had a mother-in-law. Everybody ought to have one of them. Oh, I got it. Did that come out loud? Let's see. I forgot. I've got slides. I got slides. Oh, okay. Let's see. Okay. What was Peter's father's name?
Zebedee.
Pardon?
Zebedee.
No, that was James and John. Remember when when Peter made the great confession? It said, Simon Bar-Jonah. Bar-Jonah means son of Jonah. Where did Peter live? Bethsaida of Galilee. Now, when he was with his mother-in-law, that time he was in Capernaum. He had Capernaum, but he was a fisherman, lived as a fisherman. That's how his occupation was. We already talked about what kind of people fishermen were of that day. They weren't the religious leaders that you would think that Jesus would call, those that were trained in everything. Peter, other than maybe Matthew, the people hated tax collectors worse. But fishermen were just kind of out there alone. What was Peter doing when he was called? Fishing. What would you expect a fisherman to do? Andrew, and I think Peter was a disciple of John the Baptist. And they were there when John the Baptist was saying, this person coming after me, I'm not even able to untie his, they didn't have boots back then, sandals. I didn't have to untie his sandals. And then Andrew went and found Peter, and he said, I found the Messiah. Now another instance, because if the Gospels were the same, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, if they were the same throughout, there'd be no reason to read it. But the Gospels were told by people based on their experience and their remembrance. And if something happens and we all see it, if I asked you later, we wouldn't all tell it the same. Another one says that in John, I don't think I've got John on there, do I? Yeah. John says they'd been out fishing and hadn't caught anything. That's the kind of fisherman I am. I can't catch a cold. But Jesus told them, put your nets back out. And because of that, they had so many fish, they were just, and it wasn't the time of day to go fishing, but they were just all excited. And he said, get away from me, Lord. I'm a sinner. You don't need to be associated with me. Now, we've also already talked about Peter's partners, James and John, son of Zebedee. When Jesus told him, after Peter made the great confession, who do you think that I am? Who do people say that I am? Who do you say that I am? He said, you are Christ, the Son of God. And what did Jesus tell him? He said, your name's, I'm going to change you to Peter. And on this rock, I'm going to build my church. Now, what do you think that meant? What do you think when Jesus said, on this rock, I'm going to build my church? He just called him Peter. The confession. But who gave the first gospel sermon? Peter. Now, Peter, in Jewish terms or Greek terms, both of them mean rock. Peter Cephas and what's the Messianic? No, can't think of the other term. Aramaic, yeah. They both mean rock. So I think it could be either one. I think it could be Peter. I'm going to have you give that first gospel message, and that's where we're going to build our church. But it can also be on this confession that you are the Christ, the Messiah, that I'm going to build my church on.
The Aramaic.
Aramaic, yeah. I could.
Doesn't that mean little rock?
I don't know.
Read that.
I know it's big rock.
Rock.
Oh, okay.
Was special.
Now, when Jesus came to Peter, whether it was Andrew coming to get him and him bringing him to Jesus, or they're fishing and doing it, either way, what did they do? What did all the disciples do when Jesus called them? He left everything. In the case of Peter, Peter and Andrew, James, and John, they left their boats, they left their nets, they left the only occupation they ever knew. They also left their families. Now, fishermen, then later on, put this in there. Later on, when Jesus asked them, Peter said, what about us? We've left everything for you. Jesus said, I got you. Peter was bold and impetuous, oftentimes in the wrong, though. Yes, he said that Jesus was the Messiah, but what did Peter also do that Jesus rebuked him? Yeah, when Jesus was foretelling his death, Peter said, no way is this ever going to happen to you. And Jesus told him, he said, I rebuke you because you're thinking on the same terms as Satan, not the way I would think of it. All right? Now, we talked about that Peter was changed because he was with Jesus. He was an eyewitness. He, unlike Mark, when Mark was writing with Peter's instruction, the book of Mark is getting it secondhand. Peter is saying, I was there, I saw it, this is how it happened. And so we've listed just a few of the miracles that Jesus witnessed. Now, the first miracle was what? Water into wine. And that was a miracle. But when you look at some of these other miracles, I mean, they were just little things, little rocks, what you want to call them. They were just little things. He healed a man with leprosy. Remember, the man with leprosy came, Lord, if you are willing. Jesus said, not only am I willing, you're cleansed. Paralytic man lowered through the roof. And some people write this story in with while they were at his mother-in-law's house. Nevertheless, wherever it was, these people had so much faith that they carried their friend and they couldn't get through the crowd. And so they said, we'll go up and come from the top down. And Jesus healed that man. And you remember, Jesus also said, your sins are forgiven. And that's what really made the religious leaders of that time all bent out of shape. Remember when Jesus looked at the fig tree and had nothing on it? And Jesus cursed the fig tree. Now, in this area, if your tree dies, how do you know your tree's dead? The leaves. The leaves are brown. The leaves fall off, everything. This tree withered from the roots up. A complete miracle. Remember, Jesus sent them on. He went up the mountain to pray, and he took off and walked on the water. Now, that's a pretty good miracle. We from Alabama say only Bear Bryant and Nick Saban could do that. But that was a miracle. That was a miracle. And then what did Peter do? He said, let me come to you. And he was doing so good until he looked around and thought to himself, I don't need to be here. This is a mistake. But Jesus reached out, grabbed him, picked him up, and saved him. Jesus had power over the winds and the waves. In that instance, when he got into the boat, everything calmed down. Now, another instance, when Jesus was in the stern of the boat and asleep, and everything is just going wild, the waves, the wind, and these were fishermen that lived their lives on the Sea of Galilee in a the boat, risking their lives because those things would come up just like that. But these men who had lived their life doing this, they were scared to death. And they came down to Jesus, sitting there asleep on the stern of the boat, and said, Master, don't you care that we're drowning? And what did Jesus say? Quiet. Be still. And now, that would be definitely in the miracle range. Jesus healed many who were sick, leprosy, blind, lame, even raised people from the dead. The feeding of the multitudes. I didn't put the water in the wine as a great miracle, but how he took just a few loaves of fishes, and served multitudes, and then picked up more than he had out. Definite miracle. Peter witnessed the transformation. Peter, James, and John, the kind of a core group with Jesus, witnessed the transformation. They saw Elijah and Moses and Jesus. Jesus' humanity was kind of peeled back to show his divine nature. And Peter was just overwhelmed. And what did Peter do? Let me build a tabernacle. One for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah. And what happened? God spoke and said, Peter, shut up. Listen to my son. Peter was always talking when he should have been listening. With children nowadays, we say, God gave you 2 ears and 1 mouth. That means you should do twice as much of this and less of this. But Peter just couldn't help himself. How many of you like to fish? Okay. Sean had his hand way up. I like to fish, but like I said earlier, I can't even catch a cold. But here, they came to him and said, doesn't your master pay the tax, or the temple tax? And so what did Peter do? Jesus told him, go out, catch a fish. When you open his mouth, there you'll be. Now, I said, I can't catch fish, but I sure wouldn't expect to find money in the fish. The demon-possessed man that nobody was able to confine, Jesus healed him and sent those spirits into the hogs, and they all ran down. The people asked him, said, we leave here. The healing of the woman with the blood, issue of blood. They were on the way to Jairus' daughter, but on the way, people were, wanting to be around him, crowding into him, and Jesus said, somebody has touched me. And Peter said, they're all crowding around. Of course somebody touched you. Jesus said, I felt power leave from me. But there again, he's right there with Jesus when this happens. Then when they got to Jairus', however you say that, house, everybody else, they ran out except for Peter, James, and John. And they went up and saw his daughter come back to life. Peter once asked, how many times do I have to forgive my brother? And Jesus told him, he said, 7 times? Jesus said, no, 77 times. And that's not an exact number. He just says, continue to forgive him as you go along. When Jesus was talking to him and he said, my body is flesh, my blood is drink, meaning the Lord's Supper that we're looking at. This is for you. You have to eat my flesh and drink my blood. And a lot of people said, this is too far for me. I can't go down this road. And so a lot of the disciples walked away. And Jesus said, y'all want to walk away too? And Peter says, where can we go? Who has the words of life but you? There are other instances of the miracle. The Passover, where Jesus sent Peter, follow this man, he'll take you to the upper room where you prepare my Passover. At the Passover, Jesus strips down and starts washing feet. And what does Peter say? No, Lord, you're not going to wash my feet. And Jesus said, I don't wash your feet, you have no part in me. And Peter says, not only my feet, but just give me a complete once over. The It's also at the Passover that Jesus predicts Peter's betrayal. Now, Peter had already said, Lord, if we have to die with you, that's what we're going to do. And Jesus said, before the rooster crows, you're going to deny me 3 times. Now, that had to hurt. That had to hurt. Lord, you know I love you. But that had to hurt. But sure enough, that's what happened. In Gethsemane, where Jesus told him, said, stay here and pray with me. I'm just about distressed to death. And what were Peter, James, and John were taken further with him? They were all asleep. Then when the crowds, the mobs, came to arrest Jesus, what did Peter do? Cut off an ear. I don't know what he was aiming at, but he got the ear, and Jesus said, put the sword away. This has got to happen. This has got to happen. So then they take Jesus, they take him before Caiaphas, the high priest, and the religious leaders, and John was able to go on in. He kind of got Peter brought in with him. They're sitting out there by the fire, and a little servant girl comes by and says, You were with him. And Peter said, No, I wasn't. So he moved over to another place. Somebody else came along and said, You were with Jesus. And Peter said, I tell you, I don't know him. And then the third time, he denied him. It says that the cock crowed, and Jesus looked out at him, and they met eye to eye. Now, said Peter went away weeping bitterly. That probably doesn't even begin to express how he felt. To see Jesus looking at him after he denied him 3 times, and to see the hurt in Jesus' face, that Peter, one of his closest people, denied him. When they came and said, after the death, the burial, they said, He's risen. John and Peter, they took off. But when they got there, John got there first. Peter just busted right on through. Got there first. They saw the linen wraps right there, the towel that had over his face. And so they knew that he had risen. As they left, an angel came to some of the women and says, Tell your people to go on in, go stay here. Tell his disciples and Peter. They want to specify Peter has got to be here because Jesus is not through with him. As fishermen do, later they went fishing. They were just at a loss. Without Jesus, they were just lost. And so they went fishing, and they fished and hadn't caught anything. And they looked, and there was a man on the shore with a little fire, and he said, "Throw out on the right side." Threw out, and they had so much fish that their nets should have broken, and it should have swamped them, but they were able to bring it in. And John said, "It's the Lord." And Peter closes it all, jumps in and takes out there. And Jesus asked him, "Peter, do you love me?" "Yes, Lord, you know I do." "Feed my sheep." He did that 3 times. Now, what do you think he did 3 times? Because Peter was so hard-headed? 3 times denial. 3 times. I'm going to repeat it. Yes, Peter was hard-headed, but that's the reason. How do you think Peter felt with the question, "Do you love me?" He was hurt, but at the same time when he said, "Feed my sheep," it gave him a relief to know that Jesus was still talking to him. Jesus goes on to say, talking about the death of the apostles, he tells Peter, he says, "When you're old, somebody else is going to dress you. Somebody else is going to lead you. They're going to lead you someplace that you don't want to go." Historians say that Peter was in prison and dressed in prison clothes. And they bound him up and led him to be executed. And whether it's true or not, said that he was to be crucified, but because Peter didn't think himself worthy to be crucified like the Lord was, he said, crucify me upside down. And that's what historians relate to what Jesus said. Peter was, even after death, Peter was there when Jesus appeared, when he ascended on the Mount of Olives with the 120 that were gathered together. He was even the head person to do the business meeting that says, hey, we're supposed to have 12 of us, and now Judas is gone, and they chose Matthias. Peter healed the crippled man lame from birth when they told him, he said, silver and gold I don't have, but what I do have, I'll do this for you. Peter and John before the Sanhedrin, and Peter spoke so boldly that they said, isn't this some unlearned Galilean fisherman? How does he know all of this? They recognized there was something special about him and said, you're not supposed to talk about him, Jesus anymore. Peter said, I've got to. With Ananias and Sapphira, well, if that doesn't bring the church around, nothing else will. Even when Peter and all the apostles were in prison, and an angel came and broke them out, and they went back to the temple and were preaching, and the leaders went to the jail and said, they're not there, but they're here in the temple. And they said, you can't do this anymore. And Gamaliel got up and spoke and said, if this is from God, we're going to be hitting your head against the wall. If it's from men, they'll die out. And so, just for good measure, they had them flogged and released. Now, if somebody imprisons me, flogs me, I'm afraid I'm not going to be going home rejoicing. But they rejoiced because they felt we're worthy of being persecuted for Jesus' sake. Peter and Annas, another person that was paralyzed for 8 years, he healed him. He healed Dorcas or Tabitha, raised her from the dead. Who was the first Jewish leader to go to the Gentiles? I always thought Paul was the Gentile man. But if you remember, Peter was there at Simon the tanner, there on the seashore, and had a vision. Now again, because Peter is hard-headed, and to remind him, how many times did he see that vision? 3 times. And the vision said, don't consider anything unclean that I've made clean. And so about that time, on the door, and Cornelius had sent men and requested that Peter come to him. And Peter got there, preached, and the Holy Spirit came, and so he said, just like us, who am I to say that they're any different? So when he got back to Jerusalem, some of the Jewish believers said, you've taken this to the Gentile. That's a no-no. And he repeated everything that happened at Simon the tanner's house, and they rejoiced. Because you can't repeat something like that. They received the Holy Spirit just like we did. Peter was in prison by Herod. Herod wanted to gain some favor and have Peter killed. And there again, an angel came during the night, and the chains fell off, the doors opened, everything went to the city, the doors open, gates to the city's open, and he goes to Mary, Mark's mother. And I didn't know Jews could be blind, but Rhoda was blind. Because, she opened the door and said, it's Peter. And instead of saying, come on in, she shuts the door and runs back to the other room to tell him. And Peter still, and they opened the door and they said, it is. And Peter went in and talked to them and said, y'all be quiet because they're still looking for me. Then not the last thing that happened to Peter, but he was called into the council of Jerusalem. Because when Paul had been over here preaching to the Gentiles, the Jewish believers said, if you're going to be like one of us, you got to do everything that we do. And so Paul and a group, and Peter went, and they said, we want you to abstain from food sacrificed from idols, from food that's strangled, animals strangled, and blood, and sexual immorality. then they left and went back to the Gentiles to tell them that. One last thing. Peter met personally with Paul, in addition to that time, 3 times. One, they spent several months together. Another time, Paul came in, and Peter had been associated with the Gentiles, but when he got with his Jewish believer brothers, he kind of started associating with them over here. And then one other time. And we hadn't even gotten to 1st and 2nd Peter yet. But that is kind of in a quick 30 minutes of Peter, where he was, what he became, what he did, the miracles that they saw, and everything. Any questions? I hope not. Because a lot of y'all are a whole lot smarter than I am. That's like what Mark said, is it tiny rock? I said, that wasn't in my notes. Thank y'all for staying. Thanks to Kevin for giving me the opportunity. I just can't tell you how happy I am to be here.